That spring night, Silver Hollow glowed as if it had forgotten it was ever a town of wind and dust. Oil lamps hung along the windows, the fiddle played from inside the hall, and laughter rose from men who had drunk too much cider. Outside, the road was still thick with dust on every pair of boots, but inside, everyone pretended they belonged to a cleaner world. Amid the bright swirls of silk skirts, Lydia Monroe stood still in the corner. She wore the pale blue dress her mother had sewn, its seams frayed, but pressed smooth as if she were holding on to the last bit of dignity left from a family that once owned land. In Silver Hollow, people didn't forget the color of skin, nor did they forget a man's debts. The name Monroe, once spoken with respect, now passed between whispers and quiet laughter. A group of women averted their eyes as they passed. A man chuckled, clinking glasses with his friend, and Lydia caught two words. Poor thing. She pretended not to hear, her hand tightening around a cloudy glass to hide the tremor. The lamplight touched her skin, turning it a warm gold, but to those around her, that glow was still something they weren't used to looking at for long. Evening, Miss Monroe. The voice behind her was slick and low. Sheriff Barrett. He stood there, his black coat gleaming, fingers brushing the silver badge pinned to his chest. Pretty as always, he said, smiling in that way that was half compliment, half warning. Shame your father's ranch could use a bit of help. I can manage, Lydia answered softly, but steady. Barrett tilted his head, his eyes sliding along her collar, then back to her face. I could help. I've got buyers, good ones. You just need to sign your name. That land's not for sale. The music changed. Faster now, the floor shaking with the rhythm of boots. Barrett stepped closer, extending his hand. At least, you owe me a dance, don't you? Lydia hesitated. The room seemed to pause with her, every curious eye pretending not to watch. She didn't want to draw attention, but she wouldn't bow her head either. Before she could reply, another voice came from the doorway. She's taken. The sound wasn't loud, but it stopped everything. The hall doors were still half open, and the night wind swept in with the dust, along with a stranger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his boots coated in red road dust. The brim of his hat shadowed half his face, but his eyes were gray-blue, calm like water after a storm. He stepped inside, unhurried, uninvited, unafraid, as if he had always belonged to this room. Barrett turned, frowning. And who might you be? The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with dust. Name's Grant Callahan. He didn't add more. He simply reached his hand toward Lydia. You promised me this dance, remember? Lydia froze for half a heartbeat. Then instinct took over. She placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, firm, steady, the kind of strength she hadn't felt since her father's passing. Of course, she whispered, her heart pounding loud enough to hear. Grant led her onto the floor. The fiddle rose again, bright and wild, and people stepped aside like gunnars parting around stone. When his hand touched the small of her back, Lydia lifted her gaze, close enough now to hear the even rhythm of his breath. Thank you, she murmured. No need, Grant said quietly. I just hate seeing someone forced to smile. They moved together, slow and sure. Her skirt brushed his shirt, the lamplight tracing gold across their faces. She had never danced with anyone whose pace felt so steady, neither demanding nor timid. When the tune ended, he released her just far enough to meet her eyes. What brings you to Silver Hollow? She asked, her voice barely calm. "Passing through," he said, "but looks like I just found a reason to stay." From across the room, Barrett's gaze was sharp as a blade. Lydia saw it, felt the danger in the air. But when Grant's hand rested lightly against her back, like a promise left unspoken, she understood something. Some people don't come to stay, yet still manage to change your whole life. That night, when the music faded and the wind carried red dust through the open door, Lydia turned and found Grant still watching her, a look long enough to tell her one truth: her story had just begun. The morning after the dance, the sky over Silver Hollow seemed washed clean of the night's music and cider. Early sunlight broke through a thin veil of mist, falling in pale streaks across the old wooden fences of Monroe Ranch. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil, hay, and horses, a familiar blend that reminded Lydia there was still one place she belonged. She rolled up her sleeves, opened the barn door, and stepped inside. 3 horses lifted their heads in greeting, the last of her father's legacy. Midnight, the strong black stallion; Willow, the gentle mare who once carried her to church; and Blaze, the young and stubborn one who rammed the fence whenever kept too long inside. Lydia stroked Midnight's neck, her voice soft. "Your master's gone, but we still have each other, don't we?" The horse snorted, pressing its head against her shoulder as if in answer. A soft creak above the barn startled her, but it wasn't the wind. A voice came from behind the fence. "A horse listens to a person only if the person listens first." Lydia turned. Grant Callahan stood by the gate, the brim of his hat shading his eyes, his face caught halfway between light and shadow. In his hand he held a blue handkerchief, the one she'd worn the night before. "You dropped this," he said, voice calm and low as the morning air. She stepped forward to take it. "Thank you. I didn't think you'd still be in Silver Hollow today." Grant shrugged. "I usually ride out early, unless I've got a reason to stay." His gaze drifted to her hands, dirt-streaked and steady, then back to her eyes, long enough for Lydia to have her heartbeat slip out of rhythm. "This ranch was my father's," she said, searching for words to fill the quiet. "He's been gone 8 months. I still haven't quite learned how to do it all alone." "He must have been a good man," Grant replied, his eyes on the horses. "They're well cared for, coats smooth, hooves clean, rare for a place short on help." Lydia smiled faintly. "I don't have much, but I have my hands and a good memory. My father used to say, 'If you understand a horse, you'll never really be alone.'" Grant stepped closer to the fence, crouching to inspect the rusted latch. "This lock's busted," he murmured, pulling a small knife from his belt. "Let me fix it." "You don't have to," but he already had. The blade slid with practiced ease, a soft click followed, and the latch swung free. Grant stood and smiled. "Not just good with horses. I'm decent with locks, too." Lydia laughed. The sound surprised even herself. "If you were planning on becoming a thief, I'd say you've got promise." He grinned briefly. "Not a thief. Just don't like seeing people trapped in things that should have been opened long ago." They fell into a quiet stillness. Grant reached out and touched Blaze, the wild one. Normally, the horse hated strangers, but under his hand it stayed still, ears dipping, head lowering in surrender. Lydia watched, a mix of awe and something warmer stirring inside. "I've never seen him calm for anyone but me," she said softly. "Horses feel what people hide," Grant replied, still watching the animal. "They know fear when they see it, and they know pain when someone's trying to hide it." Lydia said nothing. The sunlight slipped through a gap in the roof, catching the blue-gray in his eyes, the eyes of a man who'd ridden through miles of silence. "Thank you for the dance," she murmured as he fastened the gate again. "I don't think anyone's ever rescued me from awkwardness quite so politely." Grant smiled. "Rescued? No. I just wanted to dance with the only person in that room who still seemed to believe in something." She didn't answer. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of grass and dust. Surrounded by the low sounds of the horses, Lydia realized something strange. His presence quieted her heart, not because of what he said, but because the calm in him steadied the storm in her. When Grant turned to leave, she called after him, "How long will you be staying in Silver Hollow?" He paused but didn't look back. Long enough to see if one person can keep a ranch alive, with nothing but will and two hands. Then he walked away, his figure fading beyond the fence. Lydia stood there, the handkerchief still warm in her hand, and for the first time in months, the hollow inside her didn't feel so empty. That afternoon, the sky stretched thin and pale, a sheet of silver silk pulled tight. Lydia leaned against the old gate, watching her horses circle the dry yard. Their hooves struck the ground in a steady rhythm, the heartbeat of the ranch, the one sound that still made her believe this place was alive. Grant Callahan returned just as the sun spilled over the western hills. He rode a pale buckskin horse, his shoulders dusted in gold, his eyes quiet as the evening wind. "I brought nails and chains," he said evenly. "Your north fence is down." Lydia nodded, her hands still resting on the gate. "You don't have to. I've gotten used to handling things myself." "Some things take more than two hands," Grant replied, tying his reins before stepping down. She stood in silence, watching him work. His movements were steady, deliberate, not hurried, not wasteful. Somehow, his presence slowed everything around her. Even the wind softened. When he finished setting the post, she said quietly, "My father used to fix that spot every summer. He said if the wind blows hard enough, a fence can tell who owns it." Grant leaned against the beam, half smiling. Maybe the wind just likes to test people. They fell quiet again, the horses snorting softly in the distance. Then Lydia spoke, hesitating. "I owe the bank $800. They said if I don't pay before month's end, they'll take the land." Grant turned, his gaze sharp. "800. It's everything I don't have." She said it softly, like a confession. He looked past her to the field where the horses ran. "You've got more than that, Lydia. You just don't see it yet." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Those horses," he said, pointing toward the dark stallion. "That one, look at the frame, the muscle, the gait. Andalusian bloodline. I've seen horses like that sell for 1,000 in Cheyenne. The others have good lines, too." Lydia let out a tired, dry laugh. "No one in Silver Hollow would buy from me. They think women don't know good stock." "Then we don't sell here," Grant said. "I've got contacts in Cheyenne, ranch owners who'll pay fair. I'll take the horses, handle the deal, and split the profit 80-20. You keep the most." She studied him. "You'd ride hundreds of miles just to help a stranger?" Grant shrugged. "Maybe I need a reason to stay a little longer." The words were light, but they caught in her chest. "And if I say no?" "Then I ride on. But I think you're smart enough not to let a chance slip away." His voice was low, not commanding, steady as wind over dry grass. And in it, she heard respect. Before she could answer, hoofbeats rose from the dusty road. Sheriff Barrett rode in, his black coat whipping in the wind. He stopped at the gate, smirking. "Well now," he drawled, "quite the picture. A colored widow and a drifter. You planning to sell him the ranch, Lydia? No, she said, not taking her eyes off Grant. Just talking. Barrett leaned from his saddle, voice dropping, but still loud enough to sting. Don't forget your debt. When the bank comes to collect, I'll be the one signing off. Helping hands come with a price, sweetheart. Grant stepped forward, his voice low and hard. Sheriff, maybe you've got better work than threatening women. Barrett's eyes flicked over him, then he sneered. Just reminding her won't. Kindness can be dangerous. He jerked the reins and rode off, leaving dust in his wake. Lydia stood frozen, her face pale, one hand gripping her skirt tight. Grant rested his hand on the fence. He'll be back. You'll need a plan before he finds another way to take what's yours. She looked at him, suspicion and trust fighting in her eyes. And how do I know you're not like him? I don't want your land, Grant said. I just want to see it stay in the hands of someone who deserves it. She lowered her gaze, a few strands of hair falling across her face. When she looked up again, her voice was steady but soft. If I agree, how do we start? Grant extended his hand. With a word. She hesitated only a breath before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm, his grip firm, like a promise meant to hold. Deal, she said. Deal, he echoed. In the red wash of sunset, their hands remained clasped. And across the quiet field, Lydia realized some beginnings need no paper, no pen, only trust, and a touch long enough to believe someone might never let go. That night, the wind blew the wrong way. The sky hung low and black, with a sliver of moon like a blade resting over the northern ridge. Lydia woke to a sound outside, faint, out of place, not belonging to a peaceful night. She sat up, heart pounding. The wind hissed through the eaves, then paused, and in that silence came a sharp, terrified whinny from the far stables. Lydia threw off her blanket, bare feet hitting the cold floor, and when she burst through the door, her breath caught. Fire. A red column rose against the darkness, the northern barn, where the breeding horses slept. Oh, Lord! Without thinking, she ran, her nightdress caught on the weeds. The wind slapped her face, and the heat hit her even from yards away. Her voice tore through the dark. Grant! Fire! North Ridge! The cabin door flew open. Grant came running, half-dressed, his blue-gray eyes flashing like tempered steel in the glow. He grabbed a bucket, his voice sharp and steady. Get wet blankets, as many as you can. They ran together, their shadows thrown long by the blaze. The crackle of burning wood, the wild screams of horses, the howl of the wind, all collided into chaos. When they reached the barn, half the roof was already gone. The air thick with black smoke. They're trapped inside, Lydia shouted, coughing into her sleeve. Grant caught her by the arm. Stay behind me. He threw his shoulder against the barn door. It burst open, flames roaring like a creature set free. Lydia stumbled through the smoke after him. Inside, Blaze and two others spun in panic, eyes rolling white. Grant swung a wet blanket, smothering a wall of fire, and barked, Get them out! I'll hold the door! Lydia rushed forward, seizing Blaze's reins. The horse screamed, wild and trembling, but she kept her voice low and calm. Shh, easy, boy. We're here. She pulled hard, leading him down the burning aisle while Grant cleared the path ahead. A burning beam crashed down. Grant raised his arm, blocking it. Sparks sprayed across his shoulder, scorching his shirt. You're hurt, she cried. I'm fine. Go. They worked until their lungs burned, dragging one horse after another into the open air. When the last one stumbled free, Lydia dropped to her knees, coughing in the smoke. Grant knelt beside her, his face streaked with ash, but his eyes still blazing bright. "You all right?" She nodded weakly. The smoke stung her eyes, but through it she saw something in his face, fierce and gentle at once, like the fire itself, dangerous, yet warm enough to save her. They went back again and again, dousing, shoveling, smothering what flames remained. The night stretched endlessly until, at last, dawn crept over the ridge and the final ember died. Only gray smoke lingered, curling above the blackened earth. Lydia sank to the ground, her hands black with soot. Grant stood silent, then sat beside her with a weary laugh. "Should have brought another bucket." She turned to him, eyes red from smoke. "If you hadn't been here." He met her gaze, his voice softer now. "You'd have saved them anyway. I just kept the fire from taking you first." The morning wind drifted past, carrying the smell of ash. The horses stood huddled together in the field, trembling but alive. Lydia's voice broke the quiet. "The fire started in 3 spots. It wasn't an accident." Grant's jaw tightened. "I figured. Someone wants you ruined, Lydia." She knew who. Barrett's smirk, his warning from the day before. It all snapped into place. Her throat went dry. "He wants the land, all of it." Grant bent down, picking up a half-burned strip of oil-soaked cloth. The stench of kerosene rose sharp in the air. "Barrett doesn't just want the land," he said quietly. "He wants you gone from Silver Hollow." Lydia shook her head. "No. I was born here. I'm not leaving." Grant looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I'll stay, until you've got nothing left to fear." It wasn't a promise. It was a vow, forged in smoke and morning light. As the first gold of dawn spread across their soot-streaked faces, Lydia understood. From this day on, loneliness would no longer be the only fire that burned inside her. The morning after the fire, Silver Hollow still smelled of smoke. On the charred ground, Lydia checked the reins, the water barrels, and what little grain was left. She didn't look toward the burnt stable, only forward. Grant tightened the girth on his pale buckskin. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, the burn on his skin not yet healed, but he said nothing. When Lydia appeared, he simply asked, "Ready?" "Ready." "You sure?" "Surer than staying." She mounted midnight. In the dim dawn light, 8 horses lined up behind them, their hooves stirring a thin mist of dust. A boy appeared. Tom, the errand boy from the general store, clutching a worn leather satchel. "Let me come for a few days," he said, breathless with hope. "I know the pass, and I don't want Barrett finding me either." Grant looked to Lydia. She nodded. "Then let's go." They left Silver Hollow before the sun climbed the ridge, heading north, nearly 200 miles to Cheyenne. The wind carried the scent of rain. A storm was brewing. The grasslands lay still, listening. For 3 days the road was kind. Lydia rode from dawn till dusk, her back sore, her hands raw. Each night by the stream she brushed the horses, checked their hooves, rubbed salve into their wounds. Grant watched from across the fire, her face streaked with dust and sweat, the light turning her skin the color of copper. She looked nothing like the woman he'd first met at the dance. The softness had hardened into quiet strength. On the 4th day, the storm came. Rain poured in sheets, the road turned to mud, and water rushed down the slopes like wild creeks. The horses reared and shrieked beneath the thunder. Grant cut the ropes, keeping them close, while Lydia fought to steady Midnight. "They're panicking," she shouted through the roar. "Trust them," he yelled back. "Don't fight the fear, guide it." She gripped the reins, forcing Midnight's head down. Rain lashed her face, her hair plastered to her neck, the cold slicing through her dress. Still, she held on. The storm raged for hours until at last it broke into a drizzle that hissed on the grass. Lydia sank to her knees, trembling. Grant threw a dry blanket over her shoulders. "Rest. I'll watch the herd." She shook her head. "If I rest, you'll wear out. We'll take turns." He gave a tired grin. "You're nothing like anyone back in Silver Hollow." That night they built a small shelter of leather and branches, the fire weak but steady. Lydia stitched a torn saddle strap, her fingers cracked and bleeding. Grant handed her a tin cup of hot coffee. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked. "My father. He said if you want to survive out here, you better know how to save yourself." He nodded. "Looks like you listened." When she looked up, the firelight flickered in both their eyes. A moment suspended between exhaustion and something unspoken. Neither spoke again. The wind outside sighed through the valley, and their shoulders brushed as they leaned toward the same flame. The next day, the Bighorn River was swollen and wild. The water churned brown and fast. Grant studied the current. "We cross now, or we don't cross at all." Lydia's throat tightened. "If the horses slip, I'll go first. Just keep your eyes on me." He urged his horse in. The water rose to the animal's belly, then its chest. Lydia followed, clinging to the reins. A wave slammed against her, nearly toppling her sideways, but Grant turned back, caught Midnight's lead, and pulled. Together they broke through, the spray rising silver in the morning sun. When they reached the bank, Lydia coughed, dripping. Grant steadied her with a hand at her waist. "I'm fine," she said, but his hand stayed a heartbeat longer. Their eyes met, brief, steady, enough to make her forget the cold. "You ride better than most men I've known," he said. She gave a hoarse laugh. "You say that to keep me from giving up?" "No," he answered quietly. "Because it's true." By evening, they camped in a sheltered hollow. Tom slept early, worn out. Lydia sat by the fire, brushing her drying hair, her gaze fixed on the violet hills fading into dusk. Grant came over, added wood to the flames. "Tomorrow will be easier," he said. "Will it?" He smiled faintly. "No, but I'll say it anyway, so you'll rest." She laughed, weary but warm. Then silence again, only the crackle of fire and the breath of wind. Grant watched her across the glow, his hands shielding the flame. In that unsteady light, she looked nothing like the woman abandoned in a ballroom. She looked like a partner, someone he couldn't imagine leaving behind. The night stretched on, vast and still, and beneath that endless western sky, something shifted, the quiet bond of two people who had weathered the same storm and, without saying a word, begun to belong to each other. Evening fell beneath a thick quilt of clouds. The summer rain that had chased them half the day had eased to a damp hush, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and earth. The narrow trail curved into a small valley, ringed by low cliffs and dark evergreens. A quiet hollow, hidden and safe enough to stop. Grant reined in his horse and looked toward the stream glinting through the trees. "We'll stay here. There's clean water and grass enough for the herd." Lydia nodded, her voice rough from fatigue. "As long as no one followed." He scanned the ridges. Only rain. Tom slid off his horse, teeth chattering but smiling. I'll pitch shelter for the horses. Grant nodded. Do that. Sleep with them tonight. Keep watch. I'll take your place at dawn. The boy grinned, proud of the trust, and ran toward the meadow with a dry blanket under his arm. Soon his soft whistling mixed with the gentle snorts of horses, a small, warm sound swallowed by the wide, wet dark. Then there were two. They set their tent close against the rock face where the wind couldn't reach. When the fire caught, its glow danced across Lydia's face, turning her damp skin to bronze beneath the flicker. Grant hung his soaked coat by the flame, then sank down beside it, breathing hard. The burn on his arm, the mark from the fire at the barn, had split open again, red and raw. You're not going to wrap that? Lydia asked. He shook his head. I'm used to it. Some things you shouldn't get used to. She opened her canvas satchel and pulled out bandages and a small jar of salve. Kneeling before him, she said quietly, "Give me your arm." He hesitated, then obeyed. Her fingers worked carefully, unwrapping the dirty cloth, cleaning the wound with a damp rag. When her fingertips brushed his skin, Grant drew in a sharp breath. Not from pain, but because her touch carried a calm that made him forget the miles behind them. "These cuts are deep," she murmured without looking up. "You should have let me help earlier." He gave a faint smile. "You've done enough already. Didn't want to trouble you more." "Trouble?" Lydia looked up, meeting his eyes. "You've saved me twice, and now you're riding through storms for me. I think we passed trouble a long time ago." Their gazes held. The firelight burned between them, the sound of rain beginning to drum softly on the canvas above. The world shrank to the tent, the warmth, the flicker, and the silence that filled it. Grant's voice came low, steady as the rain. "I came to Silver Hollow just looking for work. Thought I'd stay a week, earn some money, move on." Lydia's hands froze, the bandage slack between them. "But then I met you," he said, eyes never leaving her. "I didn't expect anything, but I'll be leaving with something never knew I was looking for. You." Her breath hitched. "You talk like I'm just a stop on your road." "No." His tone softened, near a whisper. "You're where the road ends." For a heartbeat, she heard nothing but the pulse in her chest. She wanted to answer, but the words dissolved in the closeness between them. Grant raised a hand, fingers brushing her cheek, slow, careful, as if asking permission. She didn't pull away. The kiss came quietly, unhurried, steady, real. His lips tasted of rain. His heartbeat thudded against her chest. The storm outside faded to a distant hum, and for the first time, their breathing found the same rhythm. Rain thickened on the tent. The fire dimmed to a soft ember. Grant pulled a blanket over her shoulders, his arm resting around her back. Lydia leaned against him, her head on his chest, listening to the deep, even sound of his heart. No promises were spoken, no grand declarations. Only shared warmth, the murmur of wind between the rocks, and the rain tapping its quiet music above. That night, in a valley damp and windless, Lydia Monroe felt no fear for the first time in years. She slept in Grant Callahan's arms, and outside the horses stood calm in the rain, as if they too understood that two lost souls had finally found their way home. When the last line of mountains slipped behind them, and the open plains stretched wide as a sea of gold, Lydia knew they were close to Cheyenne. Smoke rose from distant chimneys, and the faint whistle of a train drifted through the wind. The sound of a larger world, full of promise and risk. Her heart beat faster, caught between hope and unease. Grant rode ahead, shoulders square against the breeze. Tom had turned back 2 days earlier, happy with the few dollars Grant had given him, and eager to return to familiar ground. Now, there were only 2 riders left, and 8 horses. Lydia's horses. Cheyenne was alive with noise. The air was thick with dust, tobacco, and the clatter of boots. Voices bargained, wagons rattled, and the rhythm of hooves echoed on wooden streets. Grant led Lydia toward the horse market near the rail yard. Men in fine coats and wide hats, ranch owners, traders, and buyers from as far as Texas and Kansas, studied every animal as if they were counting gold. "I'll handle the talking," Grant said quietly, resting a steady hand on her shoulder, the kind of touch that said she wasn't alone. Then he stepped forward into the crowd, his voice carrying that quiet authority people instinctively listened to. Lydia watched from the fence, her palms damp. Grant didn't boast or flatter. He simply let the horses speak for themselves. When Thunderbolt, the great black stallion, was led into the sunlight, the market went still. The horse stood proud, his coat gleaming like polished coal, his mane rippling like smoke. A man in a brown leather coat, owner of a large ranch in Laramie, came forward, eyes sharp with interest. He ran a hand down Thunderbolt's neck, nodded once. "Andalusian bloodline?" he asked. "Certified from Colorado Springs," Grant replied. "Price?" Grant's answer was calm, direct. $2,500. The man chuckled. "That's more than a new carriage." "Maybe," Grant said, unshaken. "But a carriage doesn't have a soul. This one does. 2,500. No more. No less. And in return, you'll have pure Andalusian blood." A silence followed. Then the rancher laughed, low and genuine. "You know your worth, Callahan. Deal." Lydia held her breath as papers were signed and a check exchanged. When Grant turned back, he folded the crisp note into her hand. 2,500 for Thunderbolt. Her fingers trembled around it. You really sold him?" He nodded. "He'll be well cared for, free to run wider fields than these plains could hold." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I grew up with him. My father used to say, 'If you ever sell Thunderbolt, make sure you're not just selling a horse.'" Grant met her gaze. He was right. You didn't sell him, Lydia. You built a future from him. The words struck deep. She stood still, wind tugging at her curls, the smell of iron and smoke thick in the air. The train whistle sounded again, sharp and fleeting, as if reminding her that time doesn't wait for anyone's sorrow. She folded the check, slipped it into her coat pocket. "Maybe he'd be proud," she said softly. "He would," Grant replied. "And if not, I'll be proud for him." Later that afternoon, they ate in a small diner off the main street. Cold meat, bread, black coffee. Neither spoke much. Lydia watched the passing trains through the window, the sky filled with steam and light. Somewhere inside her, the emptiness from letting go had been replaced by something steadier. Belief. "Do you think it's enough to pay the debt?" she asked. "More than enough," Grant said, lifting his cup. 4,000 from the whole lot, and a brighter future than I'd planned for." She smiled, her first true smile since Silver Hollow. "You always make things sound easy." He shook his head. "Not easy, just worth the fight." Their eyes met. No pretense, no hesitation, Among the noise and strangers, Lydia felt something simple and certain. She belonged beside him. He'd taught her that loss wasn't the end, only the start of something worth believing in. That night, back at the boarding house, Lydia stood by the window watching the street below. The wind carried rain and the tang of iron, the faint sound of music rising from a saloon nearby. Grant approached, holding out a familiar blue handkerchief. "You dropped this the first night I met you," he said. "Now it's yours again, like everything you've reclaimed." Lydia brushed her fingers over the fabric, then over his hand. Her voice was quiet. "No, I think it belongs to us." Outside, the lights of Cheyenne glowed warm against the night. Inside the small room, neither spoke. The sound of a distant train echoed through the dark, a reminder that somewhere beyond, the road still waited. But for now, in that stillness, something new had begun, a trust no longer fragile, but strong enough to build a life upon. Morning in Cheyenne broke bright and restless, the air thick with coal smoke and the calls of newsboys hawking headlines by the station. Lydia sat by the window of the inn, folding the last banknote into her leather pouch, still half disbelieving that everything was finally done. $3,000. A new beginning waiting ahead, or so she thought. The door flew open. A breathless boy in a telegraph cap stood there. "Mrs. Monroe?" "I am." He held out a sealed envelope stamped with red wax, the mark of the Silver Hollow Court. Lydia tore it open. Her eyes swept the words once, twice, then a third time before her lips parted in disbelief. "By order of Sheriff Barrett, the Monroe Ranch has been declared abandoned, property to be transferred to the next claimant if the owner fails to appear at Monday's hearing." Her voice shook. "He says I abandoned it." Grant rose from his chair, taking the letter from her trembling hands, his jaw set, eyes darkening. "He's moving to seize it, and he waited until you were far enough to make it easy." Lydia stood, breath sharp. "We're going back." "It's over 100 miles, Grant said evenly. "If we ride hard, we'll reach by dawn. Then we ride tonight." He looked at her, tongue, part concern, part admiration. "You could walk away, Lydia. With this money, we could buy land in Montana. Start clean." She lifted her chin. "My father died on that land. He didn't teach me to run." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Grant nodded once. "Then we ride through the night." They left Cheyenne as the sun sank behind the peaks. The trail unspooled ahead, silver in the moonlight, the wind carrying dust and the scent of rain. Lydia pulled her cloak tighter. Midnight's breath came hard but steady. Beside her, Grant rode Sundance, his shoulders glinting like steel beneath the pale light. They said little as the night deepened. The steady rhythm of hooves became their only speech, a heartbeat between them and the wild. At last, when the plains opened wide again, Grant broke the silence. "If Barrett filed the petition, he's got someone backing him. My guess, Thornton." "I know," Lydia said quietly. "I heard he's been buying land near the East Stream. And your ranch blocks his access to the water." "That's his motive." She nodded. "Then I'll be his wall." A gust of wind swept through, carrying grit across the moonlit trail. Grant looked over at her, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she answered, her voice steady. "But fear isn't the same as defeat. Fear means I'm still trying. Defeat is what happens when I stop." He laughed softly, the sound grounding in the night air. "Then I'll ride beside you, afraid or not." They pressed on through the ridge as rain began to fall, light but cold. The moon shimmered across the wet earth like spilled silver somewhere in the Amki Sounds. "Trees!" an owl cried out. Grant rode close, leaning toward her whenever the wind came hard. Lydia didn't look at him, but the warmth of his nearness steadied her, silent, certain, unwavering. Near midnight, they stopped at a creek to rest the horses. Lydia bent over the stream, splashing water on her face. In the trembling reflection, she saw someone she barely recognized. Sun-darkened, worn, eyes fierce with purpose. The girl who once waited for miracles at a spring dance was gone. In her place stood a woman making her own. Grant approached, handing her a canteen. "If we reach by morning, can you win this?" Lydia looked up, her voice soft but sure. "I don't know. But I have the truth. And I have you." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll win." By the time dawn brushed pale across the horizon, Silver Hollow appeared ahead, small, still, wrapped in fog. The horses were lathered, their breath clouds of steam. Beneath the gray sky, the town waited, quiet, but brimming with the storm they were bringing home. Grant pulled on his reins, his gaze cutting toward her. "This is where it began, and maybe where it ends." Lydia didn't look away from the road. "No, it's where I take back what's mine." The eastern wind rose, thick with the scent of scorched grass and dust. On that trembling plain, two riders urged their horses forward, hooves striking the earth like thunder, carrying the breath of defiance and the long-suppressed fire of justice. That night, under a moon sharp as glass, Lydia Monroe ceased to be the woman of loss. She became the woman who would claim back a justice her town had forgotten. When the first pale light swept over the rooftops of Silver Hollow, Lydia Monroe rode through the town gates. Dust clung to her coat. Strands of hair had slipped loose from her scarf, and her face was set like carved stone. Grant rode beside her, his horse snorting clouds of steam, iron shoes striking the wooden street in hard, echoing rhythm. Outside the county courthouse, a crowd had gathered, curiosity buzzing like flies around rumor. "She really came back? They say she brought money from Cheyenne. Barrett's gonna crush them both." The courthouse doors creaked open. Inside, the long wooden chamber was washed with dawn light, slanting in thin golden lines across the dust. Sheriff Barrett stood already at the front, uniform crisp, eyes cold and smug. Beside him sat George Thornton, the wealthiest rancher in the region, the man who had always coveted her father's land. At the bench sat Judge Wilson, an older man with gray hair and weary eyes. He'd once been her father's friend, but time and fear had worn him down. Now his gaze held only caution. "This hearing," he began, voice flat, "concerns the rightful ownership of the Monroe Ranch. Sheriff Barrett, as the plaintiff, you may proceed." Barrett rose, his voice booming through the silence. "Your Honor, the property in question has been unoccupied for 2 weeks. The former owner left Silver Hollow without notice, taking livestock with her. By law, abandoned land falls to the party able to manage and protect it, namely, myself." He turned toward Lydia, smiling thinly. "Miss Monroe may have sold her horses, but she can't take the soil. The law is the law." Murmurs rippled through the room. Lydia stood, her hand gripping the hem of her skirt, her back straight. "The law," she said, calm but fierce, "wasn't written to excuse greed, Sheriff." Barrett shrugged. "I merely follow the rules, ma'am." Judge Wilson rapped the gavel. "Order! Miss Monroe, do you have evidence you did not abandon the property?" Lydia stepped forward, pulling an envelope from her coat. "Tax receipts, stamped the morning I left," she said, laying the papers on his desk. "And this, a statement from the blacksmith confirming the fire at my ranch was set intentionally. I paid him myself to repair the burned fences. If that's abandonment, sir, then I suppose I've been working in ashes." The room went still. Barrett gave a tight smile. "A clever show, but it doesn't explain why she took all the horses without notice. Moving valuable stock without declaration, as you know, is survival," Grant interrupted. His voice was low but carried like a hammer. Every head turned. Grant stepped forward to stand beside her. His shirt was still marked with dust from the road, but his stance was unshaken, his gaze level. "I'm Grant Callahan," he said. "I rode with Miss Monroe to Cheyenne to sell the horses, legally, to save her land. Here is the bank certificate of sale, signed and notarized." Barrett's lip curled. "And we're to take the word of a drifter? For all we know, you're the horse thief mentioned in my report." Grant turned toward the bench, his voice tightening into steel. "A man may lie," he said evenly, "but fire doesn't." Silence. "We found 3 separate ignition points on her property," he continued. "If she'd abandoned the land, why would someone waste oil burning it down?" A stir moved through the courtroom. Even Judge Wilson raised his eyes from the papers. "Sheriff Barrett, do you have an answer to that?" Barrett's face went pale. Sweat beaded at his temple. There's no proof And there's no proof she abandoned it, except your word," the judge cut in sharply. "Considering the documents and testimony provided, I find this claim groundless." He raised the gavel. "The court rules that ownership of the Monroe Ranch remains with Miss Lydia Monroe. All further claims are dismissed." The gavel struck wood. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then louder. Lydia stood frozen, her pulse hammering. Grant caught her eye and gave a small, steady nod. Barrett's fists clenched white. "You might have beaten the law, Lydia," he hissed, "but you won't beat me." She looked at him, voice calm as stone. "I don't need to beat you, Barrett. I just needed to stop being afraid of you." She turned and walked out. The courthouse doors swung closed behind her, and the new sun flooded the wooden hallway, setting her hair aflame like copper. Grant followed, silent except for the soft weight of his hand on her shoulder. Outside, Silver Hollow was waking. The church bell rang across the hills, mingling with hoofbeats and the mist that drifted low over the fields. For the first time in years, Lydia felt light, not because she had won back her land, but because she had finally reclaimed herself. That morning, Silver Hollow seemed newly washed by the long rain. Sunlight spilled over the wooden rooftops, gleaming on the courthouse door that still stood open. Word of the trial spread faster than the wind. Lydia Monroe had won. As she and Grant led their horses down the main street, townsfolk gathered along the boardwalk. Those who had once looked away now tipped their hats. A few smiled, some even waved. No one said much, but their eyes carried something unfamiliar: respect. From the far end of the street, Sheriff Barrett stepped out of the saloon. His face was pale, the badge gone from his chest. A stranger handed him a small canvas sack, muttered something low, and walked off without another glance. Barrett stood there a moment, jaw tight, then swung onto his horse and rode east, straight into the rising sun. The dust he left behind scattered and vanished in the wind, like the last trace of a man who once held power. Grant watched him go, his tone quiet but sure. "Men like him don't need to be beaten," he said. "They fall on their own." Lydia nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, the road home. By midday, they reached the ranch. The gate still leaned, its hinges scorched and the chain half melted. The soil bore the dark stain of old fire, but a thin sheen of dust glimmered in the sun like a promise. Lydia dismounted, her boots sinking into soft earth. The air still held the faint smell of smoke. She walked the perimeter of the barn, fingers brushing against charred wood. Each step echoed with memory, her father's hands guiding hers, his voice teaching her how to shoe a horse. The summers they hauled water one bucket at a time. Now all that remained was ash, and yet the weight in her chest was lighter. Grant stayed back, saying nothing. He knew words weren't needed, only silence enough for her to find her breath again. When she finally turned toward him, her eyes were clear. "You know," she said softly, "my father used to say the land has a memory. If you work it with a true heart, it remembers you." Grant tilted his head. "And if you don't?" "Then it forgets you, the way rain erases a footprint." She crouched down, scooping a handful of soil. It was warm, fine, and smelled faintly of grass and ash. She let it sift through her fingers, the wind catching each grain. "He didn't let this land forget him," she murmured. "Now it's my turn." Grant stepped closer, sunlight glancing off his shoulders. His voice was low, steady. "Your father built the land," he said. "You built its heart." Lydia looked up at him, the words sinking deep. A soft wind rose, catching the edge of her coat so it brushed against him. They stood there, side by side, in a field once claimed by fire but now washed in gold. In one corner of the yard, tiny blades of grass had begun to pierce through the ash. "We'll have to start everything over," she said. Grant smiled faintly. "I've started over, before. Never felt this ready, though." "You're not leaving for Wyoming?" He shook his head. "No, I think I've found something worth working for." "What's that?" "Keeping this land green again." Her laugh came softly, the first real one in weeks, light and clean, carrying over the quiet fields. Grant laughed too, a sound rare and unguarded. The rest of the day passed in the rhythm of repair. Grant fixed the broken gate while Lydia scrubbed the soot from the carved sign bearing her father's name, rehanging it on the barn wall. When the sun began to sink, they sat side by side on the fence, watching the light spread across the valley. The soil still held the color of ash, but the sunset turned it gold. Lydia laid a hand over her heart, feeling its calm pulse. Grant gazed toward the horizon, his face lit by the same amber glow. "You see," she said quietly, "even ashes know how to grow again." "And I think," Grant replied, "they're waiting for someone brave enough to plant hope in them." The last light slid across their faces, tender as a touch. Lydia turned toward him, the man who had walked with her through fire, wind, and betrayal, and smiled. Not the smile of a survivor, but of someone finally at peace, reborn among ruins. Above them, the sky stretched impossibly clear, vast and blue as forgiveness, and for the first time in years, Silver Hollow breathed easy again. Spring came slowly to Silver Hollow. The burned earth softened again, damp and rich with the scent of new grass. Lydia Monroe stood on the porch, sleeves rolled, her hair tied back, eyes tracing the land stretching wide before her. The breeze carried the cool breath of the valley, and for the first time in years, her heart felt still. Grant Callahan emerged from the barn, shirt open at the collar, a plank of pine balanced across his shoulder. He set it down by the old fence, wiping sweat from his brow. "You know," he said, half teasing, This fence has probably seen half your father's life. Lydia smiled, picking up a hammer and stepping beside him. Then it'll see the rest of mine. Grant's gaze lingered, quiet but intent. And maybe mine too, if you'll let it. She didn't answer. She only held the board steady while he drove the nails. Each strike of the hammer fell sure and even, merging with the wind like a pulse. Between them, words were unnecessary. The rhythm of work said enough. In the days that followed, they hardly stopped. Grant rebuilt the barn with new cedar beams. Lydia patched the roof, mixed mortar, fixed the leaks. Sometimes he sawed wood while she steadied it, her hair brushing his arm as the blade moved. Those small, accidental touches lingered longer than they should. Not awkward, only warm. One evening, they planted the first seeds of grass. Lydia crouched low, soil clinging to her hands, a rare smile curving her lips. Grant watched her, as if all the sunlight had gathered there. "You know," he said softly, "some people plant and never live long enough to see the green come back." "My father used to say that," she murmured. "But he also said, if you keep believing long enough, spring will always find its way." They worked until the sun brushed the hilltops. When Grant washed his hands at the trough, Lydia brought him a tin cup of water. The light caught the glass and threw a golden shimmer across her face. Soft, dreamlike. "You once said you'd head to Wyoming," she reminded him. "I did. And yet you're still here." Grant smiled faintly, hesitant. "I think I found something worth staying for." She turned the cup slowly in her hands, tracing its rim with one finger. A small gesture, but enough to make his pulse stumble. "And what are you staying for, Grant?" she asked quietly. "To work my land? To play ranch foreman? Or to comfort a woman who's had her share of loss?" He stepped closer until their breaths mingled in the cooling air. "No," he said, low and certain. "To begin again. With you. Not as your hired hand. As your equal." She looked up, her dark eyes catching the last of the light. "As my foreman," she whispered. "Or as something else?" He didn't smile this time. He only held her gaze. "As your partner. In work and in life." The world seemed to still. The wind moved through the trees. A horse whinnied softly in the barn, and nothing else dared intrude. Lydia's fingers trembled slightly around the cup. "You're asking me to marry you, Grant Callahan?" "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm promising what I'll do if you'll let me." She studied him for a long moment. "You know," she said, "I've lived long enough to learn that promises don't mean much." "What about the ones kept?" "They're rare." "Then I'll be one of them," he said simply. She bent down, gathering a handful of fresh soil. The tiny seeds slipped through her fingers, carried by the wind. When she looked up again, she smiled. Not brightly, but enough for the sunlight to pause on her lips. "Then start with the south fence," she said. "Make me believe." Grant's answering smile was quiet, certain. "Deal, Miss Monroe." By dusk, they walked the new line of fence together. The valley glowed gold beneath the fading sky. Lydia walked slowly. Grant kept pace beside her. His hand brushed hers, a brief touch, accidental but unwithdrawn. On the far ridge, the sun sank behind the pines. Lydia turned, her voice soft as the wind. "So be it, Grant. I accept your promise, but you'd better keep it." "For life, Mo," he said, without hesitation. And as they stood looking over the wide field, where tender shoots of green now rose from the ashes, Lydia realized the most beautiful proposals didn't need rings. Only two hands, working side by side, planting spring back into the world. A full year passed. Spring returned to Silver Hollow Ranch. The wind swept gently across the open fields. The same land that had once been nothing but ash now shimmered green again. The whinny of young colts echoed through the morning light, sounding almost like laughter from the earth itself. On the soft, damp soil, Lydia Monroe knelt, her hands covered in dirt as she planted the first seeds of the new season. Her hair was tied back, loose curls brushing her brow, shifting lightly in the wind. Behind her, Grant Callahan set down a bucket of grain and paused to watch her. Sunlight caught his face, drawing out the quiet smile that rarely came so easily. "You always plant deeper than you need to," he said, half teasing. Without looking up, Lydia answered, "So the roots won't fear the wind. Just like you." Grant chuckled, a sound warm and easy, carried away by the breeze. He crouched beside her, his large hand closing gently over hers. "Not that deep," he murmured. "What's strong doesn't fear the wind. It just needs to know someone's waiting for it to grow." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. A long, still moment when even the wind seemed to stop, leaving the world small enough for just the two of them. By afternoon, the sound of hammering echoed from inside the house. Grant hung a picture frame on the wall, their wedding photograph, taken in the little church in town. In it, Lydia wore a simple dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. He stood beside her in a plain white shirt, no tie. Neither smiled wide, yet the way they looked at each other told the story better than any words could. "It's a little crooked," Lydia said as she entered, a baby resting in her arms. "Not anymore," Grant replied, straightening it. "Now it's right, just like everything else around here." She glanced around the room. New walls, a hand-built table, the small crib where their child slept. The scent of fresh wood mixed with milk and hay, the scent of a real home. Sitting by the window, Lydia whispered, "Do you ever think we actually did it?" Grant leaned against the doorframe, light glinting in the dust around him. "No," he said, smiling. "I never thought it. I knew it." She laughed softly, her eyes bright. "We built all this from ashes, Grant." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Ashes," he said, "are where miracles begin." She knew he wasn't just talking about the land. He meant them. Two people who had been broken, who had lost everything and yet somehow built a home on the same ground that once burned them. Evening fell slowly. The sun poured gold over the valley, washing over the horses in the pasture, the new fences, the small house where smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Lydia and Grant sat on the porch, fingers intertwined, breathing in the quiet. Before them, the sky glowed red and soft, touching the grass with light. A sparrow darted past, a straw in its beak, ready to build a nest under their eaves. Lydia followed it with her eyes, smiling faintly. "Maybe," she said, "everything good starts with someone believing it's worth planting again." Grant turned toward her. "And someone who doesn't walk away when all that's left is ash." "You never learned how to walk away. Maybe because I finally found home." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the scent of wildflowers drifting through her hair. From somewhere in the distance came the steady rhythm of horses and wind, a song of life coming back. Inside, the baby stirred, and Lydia rose to soothe it. Grant watched through the open door as the soft lamplight framed her silhouette. In that moment, he thought, miracles weren't something that fell from the sky. They were what happened when someone chose to stay. Later, they returned to the porch, sitting hand in hand beneath the night sky. Above them, the first stars flickered, tiny and steadfast, like the seeds of hope, glowing in the dark. Silver Hollow Ranch exhaled a long, quiet breath, as though the land itself knew it had been saved. And in the hush of the wind, Lydia spoke softly, her voice a promise and a prayer all at once. "We built this from ashes." Grant's fingers tightened around hers. Ashes are where miracles begin. Tell us in the comments, what makes you stay, keep planting, keep believing, even when life feels like ashes? If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you love, to remind them that hope can still bloom, even on burned ground.